You might turn around to me and say, Nick, I want to buy within a month. If there's a chain of 2 or 3 other people looking to buy and sell within that chain, that won't be possible.
Yeah. It's not going to happen.
Well, we just can't manage everybody else. So you can only control the controllables, which are what can I make sure that we can do to make sure you're in the best position to get to exchange.
Welcome to the US-UK Tax Talk podcast. Today I'm joined by Nick Mann, a partner in Collyer Bristow's private client property team. Nick and I discuss the conveyancing process in the UK, otherwise known as buying and selling residential property. This is an area that's quite fraught with complexity, often for international buyers, and so I really wanted to have Nick on to delve into those questions that everyone seems to have. We hope you enjoy the episode. Good morning, Nick. How are you today?
I'm good, Aidan. Thank you for inviting me to your wonderful office.
Isn't it great? I keep saying to people, they've got to check out the video version because they need to see these lovely surroundings. It's like a lawyer's dream. Everyone kind of hopes this is what their office looks like, but never really is.
Very calm and serene. Very different to my home office.
Yes, very different to home offices. Speaking of homes,
Yes.
you're here. That was a great segue. You're here to talk about conveyancing and the property process, residential property, aren't you?
Yes. I am a property partner at Collyer Bristow, and the conveyancing process, very simply, buying and selling of houses.
Specifically, we're talking about residential property today.
Residential only.
Commercial would be a sort of a slightly different discussion. There's some similarities, but we're really talking about people looking to buy a flat, a house,
Correct.
A residence in the UK.
That's right, yeah. And we'll go through, there's 2 different types, a freehold and leasehold, and we'll cover that, what that means.
And the reason I wanted you to come on particularly to talk about it is I certainly get the impression as an estate planning, as a tax lawyer, the process in the UK, I think, is quite unique to the UK, or it's something that international buyers in particular often feel slightly uncertain about. Is it because we just have quite a unique process relative to other countries?
Simply yes is the answer. I think a lot of our clients will be experienced, they will have owned property elsewhere, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Europe. They haven't bought in the UK, or they haven't done so for a long time, or even sold. So our aim is to make sure that they know what the current process is. If there's anything that they need, just advice, guidance, and to make sure the process is as smooth as possible for them.
And when I say we, of course, what we were referring to here is the solicitors involved in that process, because there'll be various people they bump into. They might bump into the agents, the realtors if we're in a US context. But we're going to focus particularly on those aspects that you deal with as the lawyer in the process. Am I right? You would probably like to get involved quite early in that process, and you would advocate, and I suspect you're going to advocate over this episode, that there's real value in having properly qualified advisors, solicitors involved in the process.
Absolutely. I think the sooner you can speak to your lawyer, and we'll use lawyer, solicitor interchangeably. So it's very important that we understand what you're looking to buy, what type of property, where, because there can be, we'll cover that later, certain issues, certain areas with searches, and just an understanding of what the need is, what the motivation is, timings. So at the outset, if we can get a really good conversation, a full understanding and picture of what the client wants and needs, then we can look to manage their expectations and, make the process as smooth. As I said, I'll keep saying that because that's the aim, to make it as smooth as possible. But ultimately, in order to do that, yes, try and contact your legal advisor as soon as possible.
Pitch me the sort of the 2-minute version or the 90-second version of what is going to be a slightly longer episode of what the process actually is in its entirety, because people who have bought property before will be only too familiar with concepts like exchange and completion, but those might not be concepts that a foreign buyer investing into the UK is going to know. So talk me through what the overall process from its sort of 10,000 foot view looks like, and then I think we're going to break down the relevant stages into more detail.
Yeah, so I think I'd probably say typically 8 stages, which is the overview of everything. You've got the offer and acceptance of the property, whether that's buying or selling. But ultimately, if we're talking about buying, that's the buying. we've got instructing the lawyer or solicitor. We've then got making sure that the lawyer has done their due diligence. We've got the survey and valuation, mortgage. Then we move to exchange, completion, and post-completion. So it's 8 stages that I'd say that we typically break it down to. And the main point being, let's get to exchange with as many issues dealt with or non-issues as possible, as efficiently as possible, and make sure that completion is effectively as smooth as it can be as well.
Because people are going to understand in this process, if they haven't done it before, it's that race to exchange. It's that, as a buyer, getting to that point where no one can pull out, or I've done my due diligence and I'm happy with the property, and now the risk of someone pulling out is no longer on me, and we kind of lock ourselves into that process. Am I right that sort of distinction between where risk is shared and at what point people can be bound into that contract, at its simplest, that is the part of this whole process that is perhaps the most unusual to a foreign buyer?
Yeah, I think exchange is really important in the UK in terms of what tends to happen at the outset of the transaction. When we talked about stage 1 is the offer and acceptance. That is with the estate agent. Now, in the UK, the estate agent is a selling agent, which we'll come back to because it's slightly different to the US version. If the offer and acceptance has taken place, that's great. That's one thing, but it's not binding at that point. It just sets the heads of terms along with other points that have been agreed, such as items that might remain in the property or be taken from the property, or some that are up for negotiation. Now, once we've done our due diligence, we've moved through the process, we get to exchange. And that is when everything becomes legally binding in the UK. It's really fundamental that people understand that. And that's when it can get a bit fraught and everything gets a bit everyone gets excited just before that point, especially the estate agents. Naturally, they want the deal to go through, but the client as well, because it's the point where you've got to manage the relationships and the communication to make sure that nobody pulls out at that point, because what's happened prior to that then just becomes wasted time and money.
Thank you. Let's sort of go back to the beginning, and let's assume I'm a buyer and I'm thinking of purchasing a property.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, realistically speaking, these days I'm going to be, doing some searching. I'm probably increasingly likely these days to be doing that online. I might be using one of a number of sort of property location websites that I'm sure everyone listening to this will have heard of before. Presumably that doesn't change the whole initial inquiry and offer process, because I'm just looking at a website rather than at a window in an estate agent's office. Presumably, from your perspective, it's still the same process, even if it starts online.
Yeah, absolutely. The process doesn't change for us. And I think one of the misconceptions of the property conveyancing world is that, well, it's a process, it's straightforward. The process doesn't change, as I've said, but everything within that process changes. So yes, in terms of the viewing platforms, the portals, that process has changed. People's habits have changed. I think Boxing Day is the most viewed day on one of the bigger platforms that I don't know if we can name or will name.
We can name if we want to. It's up to us.
Well, Rightmove. That's the stat that comes out every year. I'm not sure what people do on Boxing Day, because I'm not doing that.
Not spending time with their family, instead thinking about what they can do in a different property, presumably.
That's true, yeah. So, yes, I mean, it's very easy to browse lots of different properties. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the main way that lots of US or foreign buyers would find a property necessarily, because that's only properties that are on the market. We deal with a lot of properties that are off market, where potentially buying agents could be involved, or there could be negotiations with people that they've already met, neighbours or friends. But ultimately, the process will stay the same. It's just a case of how they source the property has slightly changed over the years, and it's becoming a lot more sophisticated, we're finding.
I doubt. So let's think about that initial inquiry. I'm a buyer and I'm walking around, insert suburb of London of your choice or central area of London of your choice, and I look at that property and I think, that's for sale. That property looks like the sort of property I want to buy. What should I be thinking about that property at my initial stage that's going to influence my decision later on as to whether to buy it?
Good question. I think, first of all, you should be thinking, financially, how am I going to finance this? Do I need to obtain a mortgage? If so, how am I going to do that? Am I paying cash or a mixture? Is what we tend to find in the UK with transactions. Overseas, it differs. But again, we do get clients overseas looking to finance properties as well. And at that point, once you know what you can borrow, and I think we'll touch on that later, or you've got your finances in place, the next step, and not many people do this, would be to find out, who should I get to act for me? And a lot of the time, the focus is on the property itself and putting the offer in, getting it accepted. Then it's at that point where the estate agent goes, right, okay, great. Who's the lawyer?
Yeah.
The client then goes, I don't know, you tell me. And so, and the good agents will steer them in the right direction, and they'll give them 2 or 3 recommendations ordinarily. And that's important to get benchmarks for different reasons, because you might decide that you want someone who is going to offer good communication, value for money in terms of that service, which is really important. That might not matter so much to somebody else who is used to dealing with multiple properties, or they have advisors that will handle that for them. But I think ultimately, if you're buying a big asset, you want somebody who can advise you on the risks, what you should look for to protect that asset moving forward during the process. And that's where engaging the lawyer, I would think, at the same time as you're looking at the properties, adds a lot of value, because you can then let them know, right, we're looking to buy a property, but actually we want to do some work. So can we do the work in this area? Could you have a look in advance at the title, see what covenants there are?
It's not worth even putting an offer in if I can't change the facade, if it's protected or it's a listed building.
Listed building. Yeah. And again, the listed building concept, something that a lot of overseas clients wouldn't necessarily be aware of. And it's when we get to the due diligence stage, that's when we pick up and we have to flag it then. We wouldn't necessarily, I don't think it would put anybody off. It's just making sure they're aware of the risks.
It'll affect the offer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, lots of things could. I think if you found a property that you want to buy, your heart is set on it, we will just make sure that you're aware of what the risks are, how we can best manage the process of you buying that property, but making sure you're fully aware that if there's a restrictive covenant in the garden, if you're buying a house, that you can't build an office building. Well, if you wanted to do that and build an office like this in your garden, that's not going to work.
Yeah. So am I right that one of the sharpest forks in the road at the beginning that's going to dictate what your level of involvement is in the inquiry process is based upon these 2 very, to my mind, Victorian-sounding concepts known as freehold and leasehold, which I'm sure they have in other countries, but maybe they just don't have quite such old-fashioned terms for them. Talk to me about what we mean when we say freehold and leasehold, but also from a client's perspective, from a buyer's perspective, the difference between buying or making an offer on a freehold versus a leasehold property, because the leasehold process ends up becoming more engaged and more complicated, doesn't it?
It does. The freehold, simply put, when we're talking about freehold purchase, we're talking about houses, really. And so it's a lot simpler in terms of the title structure of buying a house. You're dealing with one seller that owns the property. Some of the titles can be complicated depending on where the property is and how old the property is. But essentially, it's looking at one document or set of documents within the title. The difference with a leasehold and with a freehold, you're the owner of that building that stands on that
person
land.
A owns building, person A is selling building to person B.
Correct. And the land on that building.
Yeah.
So with the leasehold, you are buying a flat or apartment. We'll use that interchangeably. And you are the owner or will be the owner of that flat or apartment, but you're not the owner of the building and the land on which that stands on. So, okay, but there's a share of freehold. That's what I get quite a lot. And that's right. There is a share of freehold, but that doesn't mean you can do what you want to do in the property in the same way you can if you have a house. If you buy a house, you don't have anybody telling you you can knock down the walls, renovate, put an extension on, put a loft conversion in. You can do what you want, all things being well managed in terms of planning, permission, building regs, listed building consents. With a lease, you have a landlord-tenant relationship. So yes, you will be the owner, but ultimately there is another person or persons or company who own the building and will restrict what you can and can't do.
And also will come to you monthly, quarterly, annually to go, the roof needs repairing and all of the tenants in this building are going to chip in to buy a new roof, or the service charge goes towards fixing the elevators or cleaning the common areas. There are outgoings and costs associated with leasehold property that don't exist with most freehold properties either.
Yeah, that's correct. There's a few differences. The maintenance of the building is certainly one of them. And I think sometimes it can be slightly off-putting or it can be a strange concept, the leasehold. But once you've got your lawyer explaining what it means, what the lease is, and the lease is a legal document that basically tells you what rights you have in and over the property, which are all, on the whole, pretty standard. It's got the plan of the property itself. We have a lot of issues with that. Generally, that can be outdated, but you also have restrictions, things that you can and can't do, whether you can make alterations if they need consent or not. Sometimes they don't if they're internal. Sometimes they will do even if they are internal. So it's knowing that. It's what the use of the property can be, understanding what the lease means for you, what payments are associated, as you picked up on, the ground rent, service charge, just understanding. And we liaise with the landlord, and typically there's a managing agent in most buildings who the lawyer will get the information from as part of the due diligence. We'll check to make sure, right, okay, what is the service charge? What was it last year? What is it this year? Is it paid up to date? Are there any major works? So is there anything that's lurking underneath that hasn't come to light, which possibly should have in the papers that we're reviewing, that might be a potential issue that we'd need to manage. So
I don't want to put an offer of X if you come to me in 2 years' time asking for X £1,000 to pay for a roof. Well, I would have moderated how much I'd have offered for the property.
Yeah, and also, I mean, sometimes there's reserve funds. So you are paying in part of the service charge that you pay in. There's a separate amount that goes into a fund. If there isn't that fund, in 2 years' time, if the roof needs repairing, yes, and you need to contribute towards that, you need to stump up a huge amount of money or whatever the cost will be to make sure that you can meet that demand. So again, it's understanding that, just having an understanding of how many years are on the lease as well. Have I got rights over the communal garden or the communal gardens in London? I think taking it a step further as well, sometimes in the London landed estates, you've got the Grosvenor estate, Cadogan, Portman, to name a few, they can be the freeholder. So you have a slightly more sophisticated relationship of a freeholder, a head landlord, than yourself.
There can be multiple layers.
So there can be, yeah. And there's multiple layers, multiple titles. I think bringing it back, that's where the time takes a bit longer, because you could be dealing with two solicitors at the same time on the landlord side of things. So the head landlord or the landlord, and then the freeholder's lawyer, because you have to get, certainly with foreign investors or overseas buyers, the landlords will want to know, right, can they afford the service charges over the next 2 years? Is there going to be an issue with this person coming into the property, or are they a person of good character? So they're typically things that we manage, but they take longer in the process. So the freehold process can take anything 4 to 6 weeks. I think most agents will put in London 4 weeks exchange targeted.
Seems optimistic.
It depends on the property and the title, the searches that can be carried out, can they be done, the survey. If everything comes back well, can be sooner. But typically with a leasehold, we find it takes a lot longer, just because the information's a bit more delayed. There's a lot of back and forth with the inquiries.
That person sends the email, then the agent's on holiday, then the landlord's solicitor, and then the head tenant's on holiday, and
Yeah. So, I mean, look, without overcomplicating it, it takes longer. And I think part of our job, and if we wouldn't be doing it correctly if we weren't making sure the client was aware that this process is slightly different. And that's why we want to have conversations at the start to make sure we communicate that this is going to be a little bit more complicated than that house that you bought 2 years ago or 5 years ago or whatever it was.
Something I've often wondered, but you would know from your experience, people struggling with the concept of leasehold as opposed to renting? Because people sometimes think, I've got a lease, but you're saying I own the property, but I don't own the property. And you go, well, you've got a 99-year lease and you paid all your money up front as a premium. There may be a very inconsequential rent, what we call a peppercorn rent, paid each year, but you paid for the entire thing up front. It is as good as yours. But strictly speaking, as a matter of law, what you actually have is a 99 or a 999-year rent of the property. Does that ever kind of cognitive jump ever catch people? Or do they go, oh, I don't care. You tell me I own it, therefore I own it?
No, I think as long as there's enough years on the lease.
Yeah.
So we look at anything, we notify clients, and that's part of the due diligence. That's why we want to see the papers as soon as we can, so that we can flag any issues, or if there's going to be a lease extension required or anything to increase the term of the ownership, that we can look at that and identify that issue as soon as possible. But we don't tend to have, again, it's about making sure the client is aware of what they're buying and the asset that they've got. And it is very different to renting.
Yeah.
You have an asset and hopefully over time it will increase in value. And the reason why we do the due diligence is so that you can protect that and there won't be an issue when you come to sell in 2 or 3 years.
So let's talk about that due diligence, because of course this is, I'm sure where most of the time spent pre-exchange comes. You advising your clients on the risks associated with buying this property. There are a suite of things. I remember when I bought my property, searches and inquiries, this kind of catch-all umbrella term for all of the things that you never thought you wanted to know about a property, but it's important that you know. Talk me through that process. Talk me through the most common things people will see, the things that maybe people aren't expecting but are quite important. What should people expect?
Okay, I think I just take a step backwards first and say we have a lot of clients, lots of very sophisticated, very busy lives, whether it's professional, personal. They are relying on us to simplify the complicated. So the searches, the inquiries, you might want to be very involved in the process, in which case you want to see all the documents that come in. You want to know in advance what I'm looking at. That's a high level client, lots of back and forth, lots of communication. You've also got the client that they don't want to look at this. They just want you to do your job, which is, I want to own that property at the end of the month.
You tell me if it's okay.
I don't want any issues with it. Just make it happen. We have to do the same job for both. It's just done differently. Now, the process of the inquiries and the searches, that doesn't change. So when I spoke about delays earlier and making sure that, I think one of the key points, if it hasn't come across, is trying to be proactive with everything that you do. So instructing a lawyer, instructing a surveyor. We can get monies on account to order searches or get the searches ordered as soon as possible, because we've had recently cyber attacks in November 25 in Westminster, Kensington and Chelsea, Hammersmith and Fulham. That affected quite a lot of deals in prime central London, which delayed them by months, not just weeks. So as soon as we can start the due diligence process of the searches, which will be delayed, we can get things going and we can look at what we need to look at, which is, have any works been done with or without consent in the local search? So there's different searches. Some are more technical than others. The local search is probably the most important. It covers the property itself. What has the seller or historically sellers prior to the current seller's ownership done to the property? So if there are works, are they listed at the property? Sometimes yes,
sometimes
hopefully
not.
Yes, sometimes no. But equally, we have lots of properties where the roadway is not adopted. So, making sure that we know that the rights are granted to our client, that they can use the private road, what they have to contribute. So the local search will show that. If there have been any works, if there's payments outstanding on the search, we don't want to inherit that for the client. So we have to do the due diligence around the local search. Other searches, environmental search is quite important.
No polluted land.
Yeah, I mean, a developer investor would want to make sure that there's no sinkholes near the property, that there's no subsidence or issues with that.
That one also gives you the mining.
Yeah,
is there like ore underneath the premises of the building?
Yeah. So there's things like that. I mean, and flooding as well. Obviously, in London, that's quite a big thing, and just to know what the issues are around that. How frequent there have been flooding issues. If you're buying a top floor flat, you'd say not as relevant. But if it's got obviously a ground floor flat or basement and has been flooding and there's communal charges, you still want to know because it'll affect the insurance.
Do you still have to do that? What's it called? The chancel check? The one which is, so in England, there are still some properties that have to give like local tithes to the parish church.
Correct,
And when I had to do very, very small amounts of conveyancing, I never got back like a positive chancel check result. I don't even know what you had to do if it said you do, but it was a thing you had to do on every property. Do you have to pay local tithes to the church?
That's right. It's a very strange concept that we try to explain. It actually doesn't cause that many issues, and there's indemnity insurance in place for a lot of that. So it's something we have to
some weird and wonderful ones.
Yeah. It's one that we have to explain to the client and make sure that they understand it, but in reality it's not really going to be a main issue.
One of the things that slightly confuses some people in my experience about this process is that this is all the buyer's risk. It's caveat emptor, that classic Latin phrase, but also it's the buyer's cost. It's not for the solicitors acting for the seller to hand over a pack and go, here is the property pack, make sure you're happy with it. It's for the seller to go, well, you want to buy the property, you go and satisfy yourselves with whatever checks you want to do, which, coming back to the point you made previously about the balance of risk, if that seller then pulls out, says, I've got a better offer, or I've taken my property off the market, and you've sunk what can be several thousands of pounds, even for a relatively straightforward freehold purchase, that's money down the drain. It is a risk that you as the buyer have to shoulder, is it not? That if this seller doesn't want to proceed, there is a point at which you have spent money but will not get that back.
Correct. Part of the problem that we have, and this is why exchange is so important, is that the process in the UK, as we've touched on, isn't legally binding, the purchase until we exchange. So,
and there's no penalty for pulling out.
There's no penalty prior to that pulling out. You just, if you're buying, you've wasted costs on a survey, searches, and lawyers' fees. You can, it's of very little comfort, offer to sell your searches. You could also do the same with the survey. However, with your ultimate goal being you want to purchase the property, it's a bitter taste. And part of what we have to do is to make sure that the communication lines are open and making sure that we're not delaying matters. So we're being proactive, that we're ordering searches on time, we're reviewing the title, we're making sure that the seller's aware that we are a serious buyer. If they're looking at, if they're accepting a different or higher offer, there's not a lot we can do. There are exclusivity agreements, so we do get this very rarely, but if you are intent on buying this property at a very high value, you are aware that there are other people who viewed it, and you want to lock the seller in, we can enter into a pre-contract agreement.
Would that be like an option agreement?
Essentially, it's called an exclusivity because it binds the seller and the buyer for a certain amount of time, that within this period, you can't market the property, you can't show this property to anybody else. So the exclusivity agreement essentially acts as the pre-contract. We will get to the point of exchange and nobody is going to jump in.
Is that particularly important in a chain, which we haven't talked about yet, where, of course, lots of people who are buying are also simultaneously selling, and you don't want to put your money where your mouth is on a purchase until you know your sale is lined up. But if your buyer on your sale is dragging their feet, and that's making you drag your feet, that presumably is a very, very common tension when you've got 3, 4, 5 properties sitting in a chain, making sure that you're not the one holding up the whole process.
Yeah. 2 points here. I think, so the exclusivity agreement sits separately. That's on a standalone deal. So a lot of the deals that we come across can be very different in nature. You can have a seller and a buyer, and there's no chain. And with that, again, if you're buying a high value property, you want to lock it in, you're concerned as a buyer that somebody else might purchase this property, we can negotiate. The issue with that is that we can spend more time negotiating a contract and making sure that the carve-outs are all in place. But again, you're incurring fees before anything's actually been done. And
you're spending time on the exclusivity, which you could be spending time on the search and inquiry. Yes.
Yeah. How well are you spending your time? But it locks the seller in for the buyer. And if that is their need, again, when we talk about having discussions about wants and needs, if your ultimate goal is, I want to buy this property, I don't want anybody else to buy this, an exclusivity agreement can be great. However, the risk with those, as there's risks with everything, is that there's usually a deposit, a non-refundable deposit put down. So with the exclusivity agreements on a one-to-one, a sale and a purchase standalone, they work. In a chain, they don't work. So talking about a chain, they tend to happen where ultimately you want to sell your property. And we often find, which isn't very helpful, that you find the property you want to buy before you find
You're so excited.
Yeah. And then you've got to get everything to line up. Now, the hard part we have is managing the chain, because there's fewer things that you can do in a chain. You can't, we touched on before about, what happens in a purchase if the seller pulls out. Well, there's nothing you can do. If there's no exclusivity agreement, you haven't got anything binding, unfortunately, the seller can do that. And equally, you can do that as the buyer, and everybody's wasted their costs. But do you know what? If it's not the right property or something crops up and it's not right for you as a buyer, then you've walked away knowing it's not the right property. In a chain, it becomes a bit more complicated in terms of the timings that you might turn around to me and say, Nick, I want to buy within a month. If there's a chain of 2 or 3 other people looking to buy and sell within that chain, that won't be possible.
Yeah. It's not going to happen.
Well, we just can't manage everybody else. So you can only control the controllables, which are, what can I make sure that we can do to make sure you're in the best position to get to exchange?
It would be cynical of me to assume that someone at some point in history might have used that chain as leverage. You really want this property to complete in the next X number of weeks because you've got your own property. So can I squeeze the price? Presumably that's far too underhanded and cynical for a property lawyer.
The agents are very good.
Sorry, for the agents, I say, not for the lawyer, for the agents.
Well, the agents are very good at managing, again, the clients. So to touch on the agent's role in the UK, which we'll just cover at a very simple level, they act solely for the seller. They're selling agents. Now, that concept differs in other countries, certainly in the US, where they can be involved for both parties. Here, we have selling agents on the whole. So you find that property you want to buy, you negotiate as a buyer with the selling agent.
The agent's very chummy to you. They're very friendly to you because they want to sell the property, but they do not act for you.
Correct. Yes. So, and that's where, and equally, each seller or buyer individually has their own lawyer instructed. So the seller has their seller's lawyer that acts for them. You have your lawyer that acts for you. We act independently. So regardless of if there's a selling agent, a buying agent, anybody else in the process, a lender, will touch on that separately. I act for you, Aidan. So, anything that we discuss is obviously private and confidential, and everything is in your best interest. So it might not at times be in the agent's best interest if, for whatever reason, you're coming to the end of, we've just gone past the tax year, but you're coming to the end of the tax year and actually your monies are tied up and you can't get to them to complete until the new tax year. Or whatever it might be. There's something going on in the background, you're due a big bonus, but you're not going to get it until a certain time. You won't want to tell, or necessarily might not want to tell the agent that, and certainly the seller that. So it's important that we manage that relationship and we say, right, well, we know that. We can certainly make sure that they're advised that we're doing everything we can. Don't worry about the financial part of it. You don't have to disclose everything, but we can make sure that we're very clear that, don't worry, there's no delay.
Yeah.
Or if there is to be a delay, we can have conversations around that, but let's make sure that we're progressed further enough down the line to make sure that people
everyone's
won't
invested.
Yeah, exactly, and they won't pull out or suddenly change their mind, which it's hard to do 6 to 8 weeks into a transaction.
Yeah. So you said let's not worry about the financing, but now let's worry about the financing, because as you rightly pointed out earlier, cash purchases certainly happen, but so do purchases with mortgages involved, and the mortgage company is now a third party to this process who also has to be satisfied. So where in the UK conveyancing process does the mortgage discussion start? Do I need to find out how much the mortgage company is going to lend to me before I then have to make the offer? What does the mortgage company want to know about the property? I appreciate neither of us are qualified to advise on mortgages, but as a conveyancing solicitor who deals with a lot of mortgage companies, how do mortgages fit into the whole process?
Yeah, I tend to find that the client has already looked into their finances prior to making the offer. So it's important to know what agreement in principle you can get from a lender. So you earn X, but if it's you on your own, if it's you and a partner, it's what can you combined have put towards the mortgage? What's the amount you can borrow? You don't need to have specific details about the property at that point. So it's just a case of I earn X, I can borrow Y.
Mm-hmm.
And
that, put up Z capital up front.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. And I think there's sometimes we get, it's not a big point, but when we talk about the deposit with the mortgages, it's different concept to the deposit on exchange. So the deposit with the mortgages, you might be getting an 80% loan, and that means that your deposit you're putting down is 20%. So I often get clients that come to me saying, I'm financing, because that's one of the questions we ask, how are you financing? 80% mortgage, 20% deposit. And it's like, that's great. We don't need the 20% deposit at that point. We just need the 10% deposit for exchange.
Which is the sort of standard figure.
Which is the standard figure in the UK, which is deemed acceptable in most contracts. It can be negotiated, but it would be rare because you need to fund the purchase. So why don't you have the deposit?
The flip side is, I know it fluctuates hugely with the markets, but banks would offer you a 95% loan with a 5% mortgage. I mean, back in the day, you could get a 100% mortgage. So it goes both ways. The mortgage on the deposit on the mortgage might be bigger than the deposit on the contract. Mm-hmm. But I appreciate most people want to make their mortgage deposit as high as possible because it brings their lending down.
Correct, yeah. And I think going back to when to engage with the mortgage lender. So what we tend to find in the process is that that's done very early on. It's important. Sometimes a lot of the financial institutions, if you're a finance professional, they have in-house or certainly recommended services, and they will get a mortgage broker who will contact them and run their details over them. They might not be independent. They might be. We tend to recommend to our clients, try and find an independent broker. Now, some of the, again, estate agents, they'll have recommendations, not just for lawyers, for brokers as well. It makes no difference to us who the client uses. But if they have an independent broker, they're looking out for their best interests. So in the same way we would be doing the same, why not speak to an independent broker who can scour the whole market and find the best deal for you in your circumstances?
Rather than speaking frankly, High Street Bank X will happily speak to you about a mortgage, but don't be surprised when High Street Bank X offers you a mortgage with High Street Bank X.
Correct.
Even if you could have got a better deal with someone else.
Well, they can only do that.
Yeah.
So you might go to High Street Bank X and say, this is, I want to find out what I can borrow. I bank with
you already. Yeah. You pepper me with emails all the time saying, hey, look, you can borrow with us. And so I'm coming to you.
It's an easy win. Yeah. So you do that in the first instance, but make sure, I think, if you're looking around, that you get an independent mortgage broker, financial advisor to, if you haven't already got one, to help you with that process, because I think it helps. And at that point, we would then be engaged to make sure that we can act for the lender and we know what their requirements are. Because when I mentioned earlier that I act solely for you, I do. But if you have a mortgage lender involved, we act for the mortgage lender separately. So I'm instructed to act for the bank in making sure that they secure their charge the loan over the property, and the two can't come into conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to make sure that there's certain things where you might say, well, Nick, I don't care about the chancel search. I don't want that chancel search. And I say, yes, Aidan, but simply put, the mortgage company is lending you a lot of money. So they want their interest protected. We will do that search for them. We never really have a problem with that. It's just making the client aware at the outset that one of the costs incurred as part of the process are searches, and these are required not just for you, but for the lender as well. And there's certain things where it may not be an issue for the client, but it's something that the lender might need to be aware of, in which case we liaise with the lender, we take all the stress out of that.
So let's assume everything's gone perfectly so far. We found our property. We've got a financing offer from a mortgage company. The searches and inquiries have come back. No chancel tithe having to be paid. Fantastic. So we're all agreed. We now want to buy this property, and we are prepared to commit ourselves now to exchanging. What does the exchange documentation process start with, and what happens as part of the negotiation around exchange? What are we agreeing to do?
Okay, so when we get to exchange, and we talk about exchange a lot, and sometimes there's confusion around exchange and completion. So exchange is, we want the contract to be legally binding. We want that offer to be accepted with the seller. We've put down our deposit and the completion date is fixed. Prior to that, we've got to make sure everything's in order. So all of our due diligence is done. When we've done that, there should be clear lines of communication with the client. So we've gone back and forward with the client to say, here are the issues, here are the potential problems, here are the solutions, but we're happy that you will get a good title, and that if there is a mortgage company, they can lend the money. One thing that I do always say to clients is, it's not just buying you the property, but we look at you selling the property. So we want to make sure that you've got a clean exit, and that's really important. So part of the process and the due diligence is writing a report for you.
You might not care. I mean, maybe it matters slightly less with a foreign buyer because you're more likely to have it as an investment, but you might not care about X, and you're prepared to buy the property in spite of X. But think about now having to sell that property in the future. Is that going to matter to the next person that you're selling to?
Correct, yeah. So before exchange, we want to make sure everything is clear. If you are a cash purchaser, we tend to find they're more relaxed, their requirements, than a lender. A lender has certain requirements that have to be met. You could take a view, which is a phrase that we use in the property world, on certain things, because you might think, well, I'm not bothered about that. I'm going to rent the property and I will sell it in 5 years and see how it does. And the fact that I can't do this, that, the other to the garden, or there's a problem here, there, or everywhere, it's minor. I'm not worried about it, because I'm gonna move in. If you are moving in, I'm not going to touch it. I'm just going to use it a couple of months a year, and then I'll sell it in 5 years. So that type of property, we still need to make sure, because you could, when you're selling, or that person when they're selling, could be selling to somebody even at high values with a mortgage. And if we've suddenly, at the client's request, and even if we've advised them, look, this isn't in your best interests, and we can have commercial decisions around that, let's make sure that we don't have a problem when you come to sell, because you could sell to somebody that's got a mortgage and it will be a problem then. So all we're doing is kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
So what we do is we send the client a report, and we have conversations with the client to say, right, here are the main sticking points. You can still buy the property with or without a mortgage, as long as there's no issues that will be with the lender. And we are very confident that you can also sell the property in the next 2 years. If you're happy, you confirm to me that you will transfer the 10% deposit. So let's say £2 million property, £200,000 needs to be transferred to us. We have to hold that money in our client account.
This is what in America would refer to as in escrow.
Correct, yes. So that sits with us. It doesn't go anywhere for the time being. On exchange, we will say, right, we've sent you the report. If you're not happy about anything, or if there's anything we need to discuss, this is the point.
This is the ejector seat button.
If we're going to push the button, we need to know you're happy to proceed, and ultimately we're comfortable with what you're purchasing. And at that point, we'd say, right, sign the contract, which we touched on, the digital age of estate agency.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in property since COVID became digital.
Yeah.
We can have a separate conversation on that. The contracts are generally sent digitally now. DocuSign is a format that we use. So even if you're in different time zones, we send you a very simple email or a text message.
Mm-hmm.
You can sign the document there and then, send it back to us. And even at that point, I've had clients say, yeah, but I just need to check a couple of things. Not a problem.
Yeah.
We hold your monies, we hold your contract, and I wait for you to authorize me to exchange.
What you would say, you'd hold it to their order.
Correct, yeah. So I would say, look, if there's something you just want to check, or you aren't sure about, or you're still trying to finalize dates, it doesn't matter that I've got a signed contract and your deposit monies. We won't do anything without your authorization that you are happy to proceed to exchange. So we get that. And even if you say to me it's a Friday or Thursday, let's say it's a Thursday evening, and I'm waiting for you to authorize me to exchange, the authorization comes in before midnight. Now, I wasn't, unfortunately, at that time by my laptop waiting for that. How dare I? What I would do is, even though that came in Thursday night, I would still contact you again on Friday to make sure that, Aidan, you're still happy to proceed to exchange.
You've not slept on it and changed your mind.
Correct, yeah. And things can change. So, and something could have happened, outside of the property world, economically, politically, that may have changed your view. So that's the point where, when you're happy and you've authorized us to exchange, we've got deposit, we've got the signed contract, we're ready to exchange. We always say to clients as well, it's very important, make sure you've got your insurance, buildings insurance lined up, because if we're in a chain, you will need that buildings insurance in place. If we're not in a chain, Aidan, you're going to ask me why we may not, or is that still as important?
Well, Nick, if we're in a chain, why or why not?
Okay, when we're in a chain, it's very hard to vary the contract because there's lots of other parties involved. We typically can't change the contract. If there isn't a chain and it's a buyer and a seller, we can. And it's very important for buyers. And I've had conversations with lots of US clients, particularly, who don't necessarily understand or can't get their head around, hang on a minute, from the point of exchange, I am responsible for the property. Yes. So I'm not living in the property. I'm not completing for 2 weeks. But if that property burns down, which we always say, I still have to proceed to completion.
They're living in it still. The sellers are still in it. The seller's
still living in it, yeah. So they've done something. It's burned down. Yeah. I still have to complete.
Yeah.
Well, no. And I've put down my money.
Yeah.
What is going on here? So one of the and this is why, again, we've got to have conversations very early on. We have to know, are you in a chain or not? And sometimes we get clients that aren't in a chain to start with, and they're buying separately, and suddenly they decide, actually, we're going to sell this asset as well. So we're going to tie them in. Yeah. We're going to tie in the sale and the purchase. When we're buying a property and there is no chain, one of the things that we can do is we can change the risk. So we can say, actually, especially with clients that aren't comfortable, we do this on the majority of our purchases. Yes, there is caveat emptor, buyer beware. We don't want the risk. Why should we take the risk? Yes, we're committed to purchasing, but actually we want to purchase the building and the property. We don't want to purchase the land and potentially rubble and have to deal with the insurers. So we vary the risk, and we would ask that the seller continues to keep their buildings insurance in place.
In that scenario, and where you're not in a chain, why would you still have a delayed completion? Because you can, it is theoretically possible. It does happen. You can have a simultaneous exchange and completion. But if you're not in a chain, and let's say you're a cash buyer, and it's a simple process, would you not just, in that scenario, just exchange and complete at the same time?
Yeah. So if we get to a scenario where it's not unreasonable to ask the seller to keep the risk. I mean, it's their property. So let's say we want to purchase, we get to simultaneous exchange completion, but it's usually by default because we would turn around and say, look, we don't want any risk in the contract, so you keep the risk from exchange till completion. We tend to have a slight delay. If there's a mortgage, we need to order the mortgage funds. Sure. We need a minimum of 5 working days. We also want to make sure we can get the monies from the client, that we can get the signed documents from the client.
You've got to arrange movers. You've got to get you don't want to book in the moving van.
There's also the personal. Yeah, sometimes with work, if the clients are still working, they need to put the time off work.
If they're international, they want to come to the UK, got to book their flights.
Yeah, and also, it's the seller as well. We're forgetting about the seller in the process, that they might have their own requirements, that they need time. If they're downsizing, and we get this a lot, where they've owned the property for 30 plus years and they've got a lot of stuff in the property, is going to take time to remove all of their items. So we typically have 2 weeks. Sometimes if the clients are moving from overseas, it's a relocation, they will want the time between exchange and completion, or they're renting in the UK, they've got to give notice. So it's not in their interest to be paying on 2 fronts, really, for the rent and for, if there is a mortgage. We can facilitate an exchange and completion on the same day. We've just got to make sure that what we would normally do between exchange and completion is done in advance, so we're organised, and there's less of a risk, but ultimately you have the risk that if we have an exchange and complete on that day, it rolls over. Completion in the UK typically takes place around a Friday, because the seller, if they are based in the UK, will use the weekend or whatever period it is, if there is a holiday, to move. And it makes more sense to take off a Friday, to use the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, than to move midweek. I mean, that's not always the case, but
I've never really thought about it that way, because I have that in my own personal experience of having bought a house in 2019 and completed on the Friday, and I never entirely know whether my house anniversary, my anniversary of purchasing is the Friday when I purchased it or the Monday when I moved in.
Yeah.
And you're right. Now I mentioned it. That's why they did it. They did it because then the parties can move in over the weekend.
Correct. So, and the issue we have is, and why we want to make sure, so when we exchange, we've got a completion date locked in, is that people can book with certainty removers. They know that they're moving. They can arrange their personal and professional lives. But also, if we have a simultaneous exchange completion, if there's a chain, or if there's a delay with a document not being signed or not being signed correctly by the seller, or if they've got a mortgage and for whatever reason their lawyer hasn't ordered a redemption statement, or it's taking a while to come through, we don't want you to not be able to move in on that day. And if you're exchanging and completing, you're going to have to wait over the weekend if you don't have anywhere else to move to, because you've already given notice. I mean, it's quite rare, but we try to avoid it because it's more stressful, and it's already a stressful experience.
Really strange question. I've never really thought about it until this point. At completion with international buyer, who picks up the keys? When in a domestic purchase, in a UK purchase, like I picked up the keys from the agent on the day I completed it, and then I went to the house and I locked the door, and it all was very strange. But the buyer may be outside the UK, maybe an investment property, they may never come to the UK. Who picks up the keys in that scenario?
So sometimes, if the buyers are overseas, they may well have wealth managers either based here or in the US. They will possibly have a buying agent.
True.
Who could pick up the keys for them. If they don't, it will most likely be the case that, and if they're not coming over at that time, they will ask the selling agent to hold on to the keys. So it's very rare that we would hold on to the keys. We wouldn't want the liability if anything went wrong. We tend to find, Aidan, I think one of the hardest things for buyers is where to buy in the UK.
Yeah.
If they don't know, if they're looking to move from America, they want a second property, prime central London typically appeals to most.
The Cotswolds is getting, you probably find it, it's getting increasingly, particularly the American market, that's sort of the southern half of England that's not London.
Yes, no, there's lots of beautiful places around and outside of London, certainly. We typically deal, because we are based in London, with lots of London properties, and that's the busiest market. But yeah, lots of areas. I mean, I think for those types of properties or higher value properties, if you don't know what you're looking for, but you know what you want. So I want let's say, as an example, 4-bed, 5-bed property in a specific area, whether it's within Chelsea or Kensington, or if it's in Hampstead or wherever it could be. I know what I want. I know that I want a garden. I want a certain amount of rooms. I would like a certain type of kitchen and or layout, a certain feel or a look to that property. I cannot find anything online.
Yeah.
That's when the buying agents come into play, because we understand people are busy and they tend to pick up and say, right, I've got the remit. I know what you want. I will go and source this.
The stuff off market.
The stuff off market. Yeah. So, and they would ultimately sit alongside us on the deal, and we would liaise with them. They would pick up the keys on completion. So we'd be dealing with them in the same way we would do with the client during the transaction.
So in the last minute or two that we've got left, because I appreciate if people haven't sort of felt they've really had the whole process kind of squeezed into their brains over the course of this episode, the one part to this that I'm aware that does get picked up in our firm, and you deal with quite frequently, is the value of having really good, solid advice on the legal front. I appreciate it. Conveyancing is one of those legal areas where there is huge competition in price, in service, in the extent to which it's handheld versus it's just a conveyor belt. In your experience, why is it so important to make sure that you have good and experienced representation in the property buying process, particularly the buying process?
Yeah, I think one of the main issues there can be is trust with your advisor. We are there to act for you. Now, if you've got somebody that understands, I want to understand, I've got the time to understand what you want. I'm not taking on multiple clients. So yes, it's a very competitive market, but ultimately if you want the service level, yes, there is a cost for that. Now, that might not suit everybody, but if they want that particular service, if they want to
pick up the phone,
and we pick up the phone, they send an email, they'll get a response immediately. They're not getting, trying to call Nick and then suddenly speak to somebody else. It's that the empathy that we understand their situation, and not just their property buying, it's everything else. It's, do they need advice afterwards? This is where you come into it, wills, trusts, etc.
Or in the funding and how the money's coming to the UK. Is it coming from a family member? Is it a gift, a loan? There's all kinds of things that can happen.
So that element of it is a lot more sophisticated. I think it's a case of you pay for what you get, and if you want really good experience, we have being at Collyer Bristow, it's really well geared up that we have a lot of cross referrals and networking internally. So you and I liaise with lots of different clients regularly, and other departments as well, our immigration team. So it's important that we're joined up. There's joined up thinking that this isn't a one-off transaction. You are a client, and we want you as a client of the firm. We want to look after you. And I think a lot of people can lose sight of that, well, it's just a purchase. It's like, it's just a purchase. But do you know what? I take great pride in, I want you to know that there's no silly questions or stupid questions in the process, that I want you to understand what you're buying, that you've got an asset that is protected and valued and valuable, so you won't have any problems when you try and exit. And we can have open, informed discussions, and I don't think you get that if you don't go to a certain type of lawyer.
The analysis or the comparison I sometimes draw is when you go visit the doctor, you want to make sure you visit a doctor who has the specialism for the thing you've gone to visit them for. If you go to a doctor who doesn't have that specialism, they might tell you everything is great and you've walked away with a clean bill of health. But are you sure you've walked away with a clean bill of health? To go to someone who has that expertise gives you that peace of mind that if something had gone wrong or if something should have been picked up, then you know that it would have been dealt with. You don't walk away from the doctor thinking, gosh, I'm so glad I went to that doctor because they diagnosed me with scurvy and rickets and everything else. No, you're glad you went to them because when they said you've got a clean bill of health, you know you've got a clean bill of health. And that peace of mind is really what we are there to do, is to alleviate that stressful process from their shoulders, take it off their hands and run it for them, with them knowing that it's in our control sensibly, carefully and professionally. And that is probably, dare I say, Nick, worth its weight in gold when people act with you.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. Look, it's paramount that the client is well informed, communicated, throughout, not just at the outset when we're engaging in, can we onboard you as a client? Do you want to purchase this or not? It's throughout the whole process, and it's regular, it's constant, and it's picking up. Deals and transactions can move very quickly, and certain things could be an issue that the client's not even aware of. So, I've got the experience that I've dealt with many clients over many years, and through having that and understanding that, oh, hang on, have you thought about this, or are you aware of this? And a few points that we've picked up on before, it's having the right client for the right type of transaction and making sure that you put their needs and their wants at the top of the list. And we do that for every client because it's so important that I need to understand Aidan and what Aidan is looking at. It's not Aidan's buying this property. It's is Aidan trying to get the kids into school before the cutoff point, which becomes very stressful. Does he want to complete before Christmas or Easter? What is the motivator? Aidan might decide, actually, I'm not in a rush, and it serves my purpose better that you don't proceed with great haste, which is quite rare, but it can happen. So look, it's putting your needs above everything else and making sure that you understand that you're valued. And I think, there's lots of competition in our market. You've got that one-on-one relationship. I don't think there's anything that can trump that. And the specialism that, that's why we're in the private client world. We want to act for the client, do everything that we can, provide the best service that we can when they're purchasing their property.
So you've asked me, what does Aidan want? I'll tell you what Aidan wants. These kind of alterations. If I want to make these alterations to my office at home, do you reckon I can get away with these? Do you reckon I'd be allowed these?
Partner says no.
Nick, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Nick Mann, partner in the private client property team at Collyer Bristow. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aidan. Been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today on the US UK Tax Talk podcast, and thanks again to Nick for his expertise on the conveyancing process. A reminder that we're now releasing episodes on the first Wednesday of every month, so make sure to like and subscribe, and that way you won't miss an episode. If you can also leave a review or a comment or a thumbs up or some 5 stars on wherever you're listening to this, then it really helps us promote the episode more broadly, and we'd be really grateful if you could do that. You can also check out Collyer Bristow on our YouTube page or our various social media accounts to watch us in glorious video form. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.